New Blog 12. Would these brethren be able to recognize purity of heart? I couldn't worry about them, though, as I needed to gather it for myself. When the time came to take a break, there were a few that stood together discussing the turn of events. One of these was the man who had spoken out, and I had no doubt they were talking about me. Someone came over and brought me a drink. It was Nathaniel. He smiled kindly. Then Mother Mary was there. She gave me a hug and invited me to go with her. Gratefully, I accepted. I wanted to apologize, knowing my presence there had caused a disruption, but she wouldn't hear of it. They will have to understand one day, she said. The Lord has so much patience with them, but sometimes an outside push is needed. I looked at her questioningly, and she continued, This whole nation is so stuck with its rules and laws and ideas of sacredness and sin. Yeshua so much wants to shake them all, to wake them up to what they have, each breath coming from the fountainhead of life itself. Even those who want to understand, even they are still so stuck. I felt a lot better, and she laughed. I mustn't judge them, though, because this is all very new to them. Even for those disciples who have been longest with him, it has only been a couple of years at most. She paused. Except for Lammas. He has been a good friend and co-worker of Yeshua for many years. She had caught me by surprise, and I looked anew at her. What must it have been like to have watched the baby she nurtured at her breast grow into a youth so full of love and wisdom, then to let him go out into the world, but recognize the master that returned and learn from him. She told me more than I could have asked as we sat there out in her garden, letting the others worry about the preparations and arrangements for the midday meal. She told me of the angel that had come to her as a girl, and Yeshua's birth, and the flight to Egypt, and something of the early years in Nazareth, in a street called Marmion Way. And she told me how Yeshua had travelled as a guest to Orissa to learn the wisdom that they had to give, and how he travelled through many lands to learn, give, and receive all that he could. All those years of travail had come to fruition, as now was the time for more sowing, and the new harvest to be brought in. I could see that she was so happy to be living a part of the unfolding story. For her there was no argument. She seemed to be relishing every hour of every day. After the meal, she came back into the front room with me, and we sat together at the back listening to Nathaniel speaking. He told of the kindness of the Master, and the joy he felt in living with the experience of peace Yeshua had brought to him. And later Simon Peter returned with John, and Peter came and spoke in the front room as well. No one sat in the Master's seat, but rather on another chair placed beside it. Listening to Peter speak, though, we all hoped that it meant Yeshua might be coming soon. He talked passionately of the need to grasp the moment and live the truth with every day that came. A living truth for living people, not of the kind that could be put into books. He was inspiring, and we needed it after a long day sitting in the hall. He looked at me several times, sitting at the back, and seemed satisfied that all was as it should be. Mother Mary had left the room by then, and I wondered if the Master was due home. But it seemed he was working harder than ever, and he didn't get back till later. I was hoping that the next day would be easier amongst the group, but I was wrong. Simon the Pharisee had not been there the day before, but he was this morning when I arrived and looked into the front room. He was talking to the two men that had seemed to have the biggest problem with my presence the day before. I ducked out of the women's door and into the kitchen area where a woman called Joanna was working. Both Mother Mary and Salome had gone out to the beach early, She was quite short-handed. I said I would come out and help her if no one else arrived. Back in the hall, there was another little stir when I entered the room, but there appeared to be a divided opinion, for a couple of the men, called Joseph and David, solicitously invited me to sit up at the front, possibly to annoy the group that the Pharisee was in. I started to decline their offer, preferring to be at the back, but then decided to accept it, as Yeshua was expected to come. Why sit at the back if I could be at his feet? This obviously annoyed Simon, who would have to see me sitting in front of him, and halfway through the morning he got up and left. At lunchtime, several close disciples returned, Simon Zelotes, Judas, and Philip as well. John had done the morning talks, and I had found myself absorbed in all he said. There was an aura about him that spoke to me of all the magic and mystery that the temple strove to possess, and which he really did. But in the break time, more discussions were going on, with Simon Zelotes and Judas Iscariot being collared by what I thought of as the Pharisee group. I went out to work in the kitchen. Joanna was at least glad to have me there, and I glad to be able to help.